This episode is brought to you by Wagon Maker and Oberly. Wagon Maker and Oberly has been providing legal counsel to nonprofit organizations for over a decade. Their practice is founded upon commitments to deliver high-quality work product and a transparent billing process, to treat clients with integrity while faithfully advocating for their best interests, and to strengthen the nonprofit sector by fully engaging with the communities they serve. To learn more, visit wagonmakerlaw.com. You're listening to the IndeDocs podcast, where we discuss important issues related to our mission to preserve, promote, and protect the practice of independent medicine. Thank you for tuning in.
Welcome to the IndeDocs podcast, and I thank you all for joining us. Today, we're going to discuss employment in the physician practice. We're going to look at several different models, including private equity employment, independent practice employment, and hospital-based employment. I'm Dr. Daniel Rosner. I'm an otolaryngologist in Myrtle Beach, and have been practicing as an independent practitioner for the past 30 years. This is a podcast that I've looked forward to participating in because employment is an issue that all doctors are going to deal with at some point in their career. Either they have dealt with it or they're going to. We all know that the corporatization of medicine has occurred, and there's a lot of money spent in medicine, namely 20% of our GDP, and therefore it has invited the corporatization of our industry. I would like to introduce our two guests, Dr. Brian Roberts, a urologist in Myrtle Beach, who has also been in practice for nearly 30 years, currently serves as the managing partner of his group. And Dr. Jesse Putman is a trauma orthopedist doctor in Myrtle Beach, and he's been here for approximately 6 to 7 years. And we're looking forward to a vibrant discussion on today's topic. But before we move to that, as a quick disclaimer, these are our personal opinions based on our own experiences and should not be taken as professional, legal, financial, or medical advice. Again, I would like to thank Dr. Roberts and Dr. Putman for joining us today. We're in a little bit of a crisis as far as the practice of independent medicine in the state of South Carolina right now. We have about 17% of the physicians that are licensed in South Carolina are currently independent, which on the reverse side, 83% are employed by either a private equity type firm or a hospital based corporation. And that's obviously a huge shift from where it was when I started my practice, and I'm sure when Dr. Roberts started. And so today we're gonna delve into some of the issues that deal with either being employed as a hospital-based employee or as a private equity-based employee. So I'd like to start by having Dr. Roberts give us a little introduction of himself and the evolution of his practice.
Sure. So I'm Brian Roberts, urologist, Myrtle Beach, independent, then sort of employed, then equity, and then now independent again. So the way that went down is I started in 1998, so 12 years later in 2010, we sold the practice to a physician-owned and run group in another state. And that was primarily for the purposes of being able to grow the service lines that we wanted to have. We had aspirations of a cancer center, multidisciplinary, that incorporated radiation and medical oncology. And so this company, they were instrumental in helping us do a big chunk of that. So they bought our practice and the local radiation oncology practice. And that went well. And everybody enjoyed the relationship for a while, but they had some financial issues, let's say. And so they needed to sort of start getting money to stay afloat. And that money came in the form of private equity money. But, things continued to go downhill for them financially. And then they ultimately declared bankruptcy and private equity essentially took it over along with another company, which was not a US company. That company struggled to operate in the framework of US healthcare law and probably was underprepared. So they too went bankrupt, and more private equity came in and really ran the show from that point. They subsequently broke the company up into what parts they could sell after initially trying to sell the whole thing and nobody wanted it. And our chunk, they decided to just close it. We're going to shut it down. Then they told us our operation, the company you work for, will cease to exist on February 1st of 2024. Buy it if you want, but we'll see you later. So that we did. And, the good news is we bought it at a discount and we got to be independent again. So there's a lot that goes into that when you start over. And so that's essentially what we did. So we're now a full year after becoming independent and starting anew.
Right. So obviously, Brian, you could have never envisioned that you were going to take such a circuitous route to get back to independent practice.
Right.
But, that you obviously learned a lot during this whole process. And if there are a few take-home pearls that you could offer us for somebody that decides, hey, I'm gonna dip my toe into the private equity world and kind of see, maybe you could give us some ideas of what you would suggest to them.
Yeah, absolutely. If your independence, you might not appreciate it until you don't have it anymore. And so there are some things you get and some things that you give up. You're going to get things like support on information technology, compliance, legal, even hiring. Okay. And they're going to do a lot. They might get you discounts on your electronic health system, might get you pretty good discounts on health insurance for your employees. You are going to pay all these. They're not going to pay it for you. It's still coming out of your pocket. But these are all some pretty good things. On the other hand, you're going to be under their thumb. So maybe they don't like your compensation formula. Maybe they don't like how you're coding. Maybe they just decide to audit you without your permission, which, trust me, that happened. And they decide we're going to give money back to payers. So you just do lose control, and you have to decide what's important to you. There's quite a bit of give and take. You really do, Daniel. You really do have to think carefully about it before you leap.
Gotcha. Good. So I'm going to just bring Jesse into this discussion, Dr. Putman. Jesse is a little bit different in that he has never been in the independent practice model. He came straight from his residency and fellowship into a hospital-based employment. And Jesse, can you discuss, did an independent practice model ever even enter into your thought process as you were coming out of your training? And if it did not, why? And if you had to do it over again, would you consider going that type of route?
Yeah, so it did not ever cross my mind to try and do private practice or stay independent. I had made the decision to go the employed route even before I finished residency. So when I was in residency, I had come to understand that most surgeons that do what I do are employed. In fact, I had never met any that do what I do that were not employed at that point. So I started looking for jobs and I ended up finding this one and committed myself to it. But once I had committed to it, I then later fellowship was exposed to a private practice model for folks that do what I do and kind of saw a little bit how that can work, but I was already committed to this job.
I know your situation is a bit unique as working as a trauma orthopedist. You are going to be just, closely aligned with a hospital system just because of level 1, level 2 trauma type care. So it doesn't necessarily lend itself to the independent model as much as perhaps something that I do or perhaps something Dr. Roberts does. But it is interesting that there is that model out there for, a trauma orthopedist if it's something that they're interested looking into. So just getting back to Dr. Roberts again for a minute, when you guys realized that you had to unwind from the employment situation that you were in, can you discuss, I mean, you briefly touched on it, but it sounds to me like that would be grueling. I mean, just the meetings with your group, the meetings with lawyers, with CPAs. Can you talk a little bit about what you all had to go through in order to unwind once you realized that it really was not in y'all's best interest to stay?
Oh, absolutely. And it gave me a great insight into the bankruptcy process in the United States. And I can absolutely tell you, it is not there to protect you and I. The bankruptcy process is absolutely there to protect the vested interests. And you cannot assume that you're going to be able to have access to many things. A good example is we did not have access to our payer contracts. Okay. Nope. That's not part of the deal. And we also did not have access to the tax ID numbers. Okay. So the way they structure these is one corporation, the one you're in, flows up to another tax ID number, and eventually that gets to the main company there. So it doesn't belong to you anymore, and therefore, as you go through this process, and plan on spending a lot of money on attorneys, just take 6 figures out right now and set it aside, because you're going to need it if you have to go this route. Okay, they're going to try to do what they can for you, but it's simply up to the process and the bankruptcy judge overseeing it all. At the end of this, we did not get the payer contracts. We did not get the tax ID numbers. And you do not get your trailing AR, your accounts receivable. So you're thus given the prospect, you're going to start over brand new. And although your income is not going to come in right away because you have no payer contracts, not even a Medicare contract, right? You have to apply for all those. And they're not necessarily in a hurry. And your expenses are still accruing. Okay, so your employees, they want to get paid. Your utilities, everything, insurance, that continues to put you into the negative, and you have to simply wait until the money starts to come in. Very important, very, very important part of it there.
So just to continue with that thought, if you were entering into a contract prior to you actually joining a private equity type firm, are you able on the front side to protect yourself with the tax ID issue or contract issues? Are you able to write that into the contract so that if you do have a divorce, that you can take those with you?
I think you absolutely need to get legal help there because you need it. Mm-hmm. If you don't, you're going to be in a tough spot. You really are. This has been a huge problem for us. And we had a physician that we were absolutely looking forward to joining us. And with the financial uncertainty, she left. And, that's tough. You take a big hit. You get an employed physician like that, and you want them to be partner, and you invest a lot of money and resources, and they leave. I think it's absolutely critical that you get some sort of legal help, making sure you protect as much of that as you can. And if you can keep your tax ID and your payer contracts, that's critical.
Thank you. And Jesse, just again, to stick with this issue of prior to signing your contract with the hospital, were there certain elements in the contract that you felt that you had control over, that you could negotiate with them? Or did you feel like the contract was essentially a template and you were going to have to sign it that way or hit the road?
I think most corporations that you are negotiating to become an employee of are going to, for the most part, tell you that the contract they've given you is standard contract. That's the terminology that they'll use. The parts that are negotiable are going to be the numbers. If you get paid for call, how much you get paid for call. If you're getting paid per RVU, how much you get paid per RVU, how much they're going to give you for student loan repayment, so on and so forth. Those are the negotiable items that are important, but there's a lot of other verbiage in those contracts that it is absolutely not negotiable.
Are you still on your original contract, or did you have a second or third contract that you've already signed? And the reason I ask is, did you find that your best shot at negotiating was your first shot before you were ever hired? Once you were hired, did you feel that it was much, much more difficult for you to ask and get?
I think that's fair to say. I think your best shot at negotiating is in the initial contract, and that's probably why perception is that physicians move around a lot, because once you sign that contract, first of all, that contract is written for the benefit and protection of the employer. It's not written for your benefit or protection, and they know that once you buy a house and you move to town, you are likely not going to want to leave. And so in negotiating future contracts or your next contract, they use that against everybody.
Okay. Sounds like they pretty much got their thumb on the scale here once they've got you where they want you. That's pretty much what I'm hearing.
That's fair to say.
Brian, just getting back to y'all's organization. And again, it's just fascinating to me. Your group went through a lot. There were so many things you could have never predicted. And I think it's just so important for people to just understand that once you sign over your ownership interest to another entity, how you, in a way, become their pawn. And that's why we at IndeDocs are just such strong proponents and advocates for maintaining the independent practitioner, because we all tend to be very highly motivated people. We didn't get to where we are in life by not being that way. And to just cede that over to somebody else, you got to think long and hard about that decision. What is your feeling on that?
Yeah, you really do. So, you're selling your independence, and in as much, you better make sure you're getting a good value for it. There's many more rules that you have to follow. I mentioned the coding, the audits that might happen. Maybe there's a line of service that you want, an ancillary line of service that you would like to start, that all your other compatriots in your specialty have started. You might not be able to. And that happened with us on a number of things. We would ask, forget it, legal, looked at it, and we don't want to take a risk. You have to be okay with the fact that a stream of money comes in and it goes to them and they decide what you're going to get, what you're going to, and so you could maybe negotiate access to the financials, the accounting. That would be a critical thing to establish on the front end and say, I get to see these reports, because we caught numerous mistakes until the day they decided that we didn't have access to the financials anymore. And, you're not going to catch anything after that. Then it's just trust. Okay, these are folks that they're committed to a good return, and maybe they have shareholders. Maybe they're packaging the entities for the classic second bite of the apple, where they repackage it after cutting costs. So maybe they're going to tell you, you know what, I know you used to have 3 FTEs per physician that helped you in your office. Well, we got to make this look good. So we're going to get rid of your scribe. We're going to get rid of another FTE. We're going to really get you lean. And oh, by the way, you know what? I saw that you were only seeing 40 patients. You're going to need to up that to 45. We've got to really make this look good. So, you got to be careful. These are some things to really look at and carefully look at what your contract says. And it might say things like, you're going to be vested. Okay. And classically, you might see a vesting schedule, 4 years, 5 years. And what that may mean is you're not going to get all of what you thought you sold your independence for at all. So typically you'll sell some cash, some equity in the parent corporation, maybe 75-25, 2/3, 1/3. So you might get a chunk in cash and then get the rest on a vesting schedule. But maybe you can't stand it for 5 years. Maybe you don't even plan to stay for 5 years. So you got to be willing to walk away from that equity. So careful, like I said, really look at it carefully.
So in your mind, when you get into an employment type situation, were you thinking, okay, they're going to take care of all of the business stuff and they're going to take care of everything other than me being a doctor? I'm just going to be able to be a doctor. So in your mind, everything's going to continue as is as a doctor. But in reality, you're being affected if somebody's telling you how many employees you can use in a day, such as a scribe or a medical assistant or whatever, that can affect your productivity.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever feel like they actually would interfere with your medical decision making? Maybe not directly, but did you ever feel like there was indirect effect?
Oh, there were, Daniel. There were effects, such as especially in the later days when the bills had to get paid, and they would get paid by them unless they didn't get paid. Okay, so you might, of course, we were very heavy into cancer treatment. You might not have access. The suppliers began restricting what they would sell to us, and you might not be able to get those drugs. So you will be affected, but your patients will too.
Yeah, that's fascinating to hear that, because we can choose what avenue we go down in employment, but we can never have an impact on the doctor-patient interaction and allow corporatization to affect that. And it sounds like it certainly could and did.
Oh, yeah.
Jesse, let me bring you back into that discussion too. Have you ever felt that your ability to do the right thing for the patient, and obviously what you think is the right thing for the patient may not necessarily be what somebody else thinks, but did you ever encounter situations where you felt like you weren't receiving the support that you wanted for your doctor-patient relationship?
So I think I would first say that everything that Dr. Roberts said about private equity exerting control over his practice and perhaps the perceptions of providers going into a deal like that is the same pitfalls that you'll see in joining as an employee of corporate medicine. It's all the same. Everything that he described, it's the same for corporate medicine. You think that you're going to get to just do your job, and all the stuff that you don't want to take care of as a manager is going to be taken care of. And the reality of the situation may be that you end up as an employee just giving up your control of all decision making, and then having your ability to treat patients affected in a negative way. Depending on the contract, your employer can dictate what tools you use, what drugs you prescribe, what resources are available for you to treat your patients, a bunch of stuff. You'd be surprised. And in that way, get between you and your patients and dictate how you practice medicine. And corporations are clever in the way that they write their contracts for most physicians, because you may find yourself looking at signing a contract where you are paid based on your production. That's a common way that they write these contracts. It's based on RVU. So you produce RVUs and you get paid a certain amount per RVU. And some contracts you'll have a base salary, and then there's certain bonus structures, ways to earn more money. And some contracts there is no base, and so you only earn money if you produce RVUs, and you earn exactly the amount of RVUs that you produce. And based on your dollar conversion factor. So your contract can be written to incentivize you to produce. So you think, okay, great. The employer is going to be on the same page as I am. They're incentivizing me to produce. I'm incentivized to produce. So they're going to help me produce. And then what you might find out is that they are not going to help you produce. If you don't produce, they're not really losing anything. And so they can hang that carrot of production in front of your face because that's how you get paid, but then still stymie your production and not really care at all.
Jesse, that's a fascinating comment because it makes a lot of sense to us as doctors, because we know that the more ancillary help that we have around us, the more productive we can be. However, corporate folks will often look at that as just another FTE and, maybe another cost to them without necessarily looking at the overall picture that says, yeah, we spent more to help bring in ancillary care, but look how much more productive this employee doctor is. And that's always been something that I've scratched my head over, because I've seen it in many, many cases with employed physicians where I think they bang their head against the wall because they're not given, certain tools that could make them a lot more productive. And I don't even know how to get my arms around that, because to me, it just makes more sense that if you're a corporation, you're out to increase your bottom line, and whatever it takes to do that, as long as it's, it's ethical and legal and all, you're going to do it. But I find very often they don't.
Right. That kind of a thought would make sense to us entering a relationship like that, but you may realize quickly after entering a relationship like that others don't think that way.
I've always joked that the administration of hospitals, the only way that they can ever earn a dollar is selling something in the gift shop or the cafeteria. Other than that, they rely on the providers to bring money into that building. And so it's always baffled me as to why, they're not more willing to really push the provider. But anyhow, that's probably another day's discussion. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
If you are a physician or an administrative professional working in a medical field in South Carolina, we invite you to consider joining the IndeDocs membership. Members have access to exclusive resources and networking opportunities and are an essential part of supporting our mission to preserve, protect, and promote the practice of independent medicine. For more information, please visit our website at IndeDocs.com. That's IndeDocs.com.
Just out of curiosity, do y'all have any tools or resources that you could recommend to the podcast listener to utilize prior to going into a employment agreement, a hospital agreement? Were there certain tools or resources, books, lectures that you heard, anything that you can think of off the top of your head that you could recommend to the listener?
I would just say a healthcare attorney. I mean, get one. We have one now, thank God, that we trust, and we use them a lot. That would be number one for me, an experienced one.
For me, my advice would be to talk to other employed physicians in your specialty and just try to see how they feel about the corporations that they work for and what their experience is.
So what would an older, wiser Brian and Jesse tell a younger Brian and Jesse if you could go back in time, some of the employment mistakes or issues that you could change? And we'll start this time. I'll start with Jesse, since we've been jumping on Brian first. He'll have a few minutes to think about it.
My advice to myself would be to strongly consider doing whatever it takes to stay independent, work with or for a private practice, or try to contract directly with a hospital that's in a location you want to practice. Do whatever it takes to try to stay independent. The more middlemen that you can bypass that want to get between you and taking care of your patients, the better off it's going to be for everyone involved that matters. Successful profiteering breeds more profiteers, and the longer that providers allow the spiral that is happening to continue, the more of a disservice we're doing to our patients and the future generations of doctors, nurses, PAs, and other providers. We've been left with an absolute mess by the folks that were practicing in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, who allowed this slow, steady corporate capture and vertical integration of healthcare. And once the corporations have forced the last independent private practice to sell out, the capture will be complete, and the conditions for everybody left will rapidly deteriorate, and your only option is really going to be to just leave. I think I would tell folks that if they do choose to sign on the dotted line, you want to think about how you can act in the best interest of your private practice colleagues, realizing that if they get bought out or otherwise absorbed or replaced, things are going to get a lot worse for you. So do what you can to keep them afloat. I also think that good advice is, if you're going to go to work for a nonprofit, try to look up their tax records. Those are public and they're easy to look up, and that will tell you exactly how much the executives are making. So that can give you some insight into how they run things. Are they interested in putting the money back into the hospital and making things better and taking care of patients? Or are they more interested in increasing executive compensation?
Very valuable insight. And that's exactly the mission of IndeDocs, is what you just said. We want to maintain the independence where the doctor stays as the captain of the ship, and as few middlemen as possible get in the way, because there's just too many hands in the bowl. And as a result, everything gets watered down, and ultimately it's the patient that's going to suffer. And so this is why I'm passionate about IndeDocs, and why I want as many independent physicians as possible to join our organization, because in numbers we can compete with these larger corporations in terms of keeping our overhead down. Because the only way we're going to survive as independent practitioners is to watch our business. And there is power in numbers, and that's exactly what IndeDocs is doing, is going after things like trying to reduce malpractice insurance costs for our private practitioners, trying to reduce their costs of purchasing goods through group purchasing organizations, trying to get ahead with different business solution companies that we've partnered with. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that, and that's exactly the goal and directive of our organization. So Brian, posing the same older Brian versus the younger Brian.
Yeah.
Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, Daniel, nobody goes into a relationship thinking that relationship's going to fail. Right. But maybe in this situation, maybe you need to really gird yourself and think about what happens. Okay. So I'm going to be in this community. I have a patient base. There's this X amount of time waiting list to get a visit with me. I'm comfortable. My kids are comfortable. My family, everything is here. So if it all goes south, are you going to uproot? Are you going to leave everything? Or are you going to tough it out? And if you do tough it out, where are you in your nest egg building cycle? Can you take a break out for a couple of years where you're really not building wealth at all? And maybe you're going in the hole. We're still well over 7 figures in the hole a year into this thing. So you have to plan. Look at, what can I do to retain as much of the ability to run a business afterwards? Tax ID numbers, payer contracts, these kinds of things. So spend the time on the front end and it'll pay dividends.
Yeah, that's good. Very good advice. So I would like to address this to Jesse. If you were considering unwinding from your current employment situation, which again, you're a hospital-based employee, what are some of the factors that you would consider, or I should say obstacles, that may prevent you from leaving a hospital employment situation and then going into an independent situation?
So one of the most important things that I think you can do is plan ahead as much as possible. It can take a really long time to get licensed in another state. And depending on if you have a non-compete in your contract, other hospitals in your home state might not be willing to even talk to you because they don't want to risk legal problems. Another thing you should always try to do is network as much as you can with other providers in your specialty. Always consider the possibility that your employer may decide to terminate you before you get around to terminating them. So, I mean, from the day you sign that contract, you should always be planning your exit strategy. One of the most important parts of your contract is the termination clauses, and those can be really wordy. And again, like I said earlier, the contracts are written by an army of lawyers to benefit and protect the employer, not you. So know what routes the contract gives those folks to terminate you and what options you have for the same. Otherwise, you're going to have to figure that out on the fly someday. One of the biggest challenges in your contract is still the non-compete clause. I thought this was going away early 2024, but apparently from what I've been told, it's still tied up in litigation in Texas. It's being challenged. And so for all intents and purposes, non-competes are still a thing as far as I can tell. So hopefully we don't have to worry about those too much in the future, but for now you still do.
And Jesse, just jumping in here to talk about the non-compete, and what you're referring to is federal legislation that deals with non-competes. IndeDocs has been pushing at the state level for the South Carolina state legislature to pass legislation that would outlaw non-compete clauses. Right now, there is no law in our state that allows or doesn't allow a non-compete. It's just that they're put into contracts. So when you sign a contract, it's really contractual law. We're pushing for there to actually be a state law that does not allow non-competes to be put into contracts. The likelihood of it happening this year is probably low, but it's definitely something on IndeDocs' radar.
That would be a great thing for providers. But so, I mean, I'd say just take a really close look at that non-compete clause, because it's likely that thing, they're going to try to enforce that thing no matter how the contract terminates. There may be no way out of that, regardless of how the contract ends up ending.
Yeah, and I think, again, that goes back to where you probably ought to have a lawyer friend or hire a lawyer to look over it, because you do need that contract explained to you. And, the with causes and without causes, there shouldn't be any doubt in your mind, as to how they can terminate you, because ultimately they're the boss and they get to make that call. So,
yeah.
Dr. Roberts, if you could give our podcast listeners some of the important aspects to look for in an employment contract prior to signing.
Yeah, I think there are a number of things that you want to take a look at. One of them is going to be, of course, how you're paid and when you're paid and who's paying you. There are a lot of practices now that get hospital guarantees. We have used those in the past, and sometimes those funds don't come from the hospital pretty quickly. So the practice, even though they think they have a guarantee, they may have to wait 5 months or a long time, let's just say, and may have to make up the shortfall because no one really has the funds at the beginning of their career or work for nothing for a while. So you want to know how you're paid, what you're paid, and also what things you're going to be able to participate in. In urology, there's a lot of ancillary services. Are you part of that or not? And if you are, when? Okay, and how am I going to get there? Is there a vesting schedule? Just one day do I become a partner and suddenly I can participate in the ancillaries? And how do I become a partner? Who decides? What's the vote? Is it a vote? Is it a 75% vote? Is it a simple majority? Who gets to vote? Clauses, if the relationship goes south, where can I not work? There are contracts that might say within X number of miles of any of the offices affiliated with that organization or practice. So how big is the organization? That might be a really large area if you take, say, 50 miles from any of their locations. Okay. So lots of stuff to look at, but I would take a close look at all of those and take your time.
Very good advice. We've certainly talked about some of the pitfalls, but can you tell me some of the positives of employment? Dr. Roberts, tell me some of the good things that you have enjoyed about being in private equity employment.
Absolutely. And I want you to make sure you know that there are good things. Access things, say access to better contracts with payers. They're much bigger than you are. They're going to get better contracts. Access to support for IT, HR, legal. These are all important things and they're not trivial. Also, they may help you you want to build a new office? All right, we've got the funds. You need a big, expensive piece of equipment, another CT scanner, what have you. Okay, you're gonna have easy access to funds. There are many aspects that are favorable and helpful to you, and you just simply don't know where ultimately the relationship's going to go.
And I'm going to pose that same question to Jesse. Give me some of the more positive, favorable aspects of hospital employment, things that you look back on and you're like, that this turned out to be a really good situation.
Yeah, of course, there's positive things about being an employed physician. I think one of the biggest things that you're trading for your decision making is that you don't have to. You're not making those decisions anymore. You're not worried about overhead. You're not worried about HR. You're not worried about compliance with anything. You're not worried about insurance companies. They handle all that stuff for better or worse. You don't have to worry about malpractice, health insurance. They usually have pretty good 401k matches and all those sorts of things that come along with being a W-2 employee. And I think one of the big things for folks that are drawn to being employed is that there's less uncertainty as far as what you're going to get paid. And so you go into it knowing what you're going to make, whereas in private practice, you really don't know what you're going to make because nobody's writing you a paycheck. Even if you're in an employment contract that is based purely on production, you still have some idea what you're going to make. And again, you don't have to worry about the bills at all.
Give yourself a pat on the back of some things that you did right along the way that maybe older Dr. Roberts would look back at younger Dr. Roberts and say, good job. Give me a few ideas of that.
Yeah, there's one that really stands out that, when you sell your practice, you're getting paid for everything up front. You're selling your AR, you're selling your FF&E, your furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And there may be more in there. So you're going to get a check. And there's a lot of things you can do with that check. But fortunately, I resisted temptation and invested all of it. And, this was quite a few years ago. It took off. We've seen what the stock market has done. So that has become a enormously important part of the nest egg. So I think that I paid myself first, and I'm super happy about that.
And Dr. Putman, I'm going to ask you a similar question that I just asked Dr. Roberts. What does the older Dr. Putman, not that you're old by any means, but what does the older Dr. Putman feel that the younger Dr. Putman did positively to affect his career?
I'd have to agree with Dr. Roberts. It's really easy once you finish training and you've lived a life of extreme delayed gratification and you start getting a paycheck to be financially irresponsible. And I think that trap catches a lot of people in a bad way. So what Dr. Roberts said, one of the best moves that I've ever made is making sure that I'm financially responsible.
So, gentlemen, we have covered a lot of ground today on this podcast. And just to sum it up for the listener, give me just a couple of the most crucial take-home points that you would like the listener to leave this podcast with.
Yeah, Daniel, I would say that it's one of the most important decisions you're going to make in your whole life. So don't take it lightly. Prepare yourself in the best way you can and learn and understand that it may not turn out like you want it to, And so prepare yourself for what you can do ahead of time to position yourself for that eventuality should it occur.
So it's kind of the old given lemons make lemonade type thing, huh?
Well, look before you leave and do your due diligence. Hopefully you'll have a different experience.
And how about you, Jesse? Same question.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's literally the exact same thing I was going to say. Plan ahead and understand that despite your best planning, you're not going to be able to think of everything. So now I'm going to think of something else to say. So I think if you're gonna sign on the dotted line and become an employee of a corporation, the best thing you can do is know who you're getting in bed with, and the best way you can find that out is by talking to other folks that work for that corporation. That'd be my first bit of advice. And another one that I touched on earlier is just making sure that you read that contract and you understand every line of it, and what particularly the termination clauses, and whether you think you need a lawyer or not, get one.
Well, I certainly have enjoyed hosting this podcast and want to thank you, Dr. Roberts, and thank you, Dr. Putman, for your valuable insight into this important topic.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for the invite, Dr. Rosner.
To everyone listening, thank you for joining us. Please make sure to rate and follow the podcast, as that really helps us to grow this community and spread the word about issues that we have explored today. And please tune in next time for another great discussion about independent medicine in South Carolina. From all of us at IndeDocs, take care and stay well.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the IndeDocs podcast. Our producer is Jenna Leaf. Promotional support by Uplift Marketing. Mixing and mastering by Noah Martin. Content editing by Jenna Leaf. Additional production support by Noah Martin, Rebecca Lockhart, John Robinson, and the IndeDocs Board of Directors. For more information, please visit us online at IndeDocs.com.